Welcome to the first video of Deframing Stories. In this channel we are going to bring you around the world, connecting history, geopolitics, culture, peace, conflict and more. For our first reportage, we traveled to Senegal to explore more in depth the peace-building process happening in its southern region, Casamance. Despite not being very well known, Casamance is actually the home of Africa's longest-running conflict, having officially begun in the early 1980s. But before talking about Casamance, we need to learn a bit more about the history of Senegal within the context of West Africa. I deeply believe that food is history, culture and love. And I want to start from Senegal's national dish to tell the history of this country, ceebu. This delicious rice-based meal that contains vegetables, fish and tomato sauce, along with a myriad of flavors, is believed to be the forefather of jollof rice. Oh, I know I'm entering a dangerous territory. Have you ever heard of the Jollof Wars? Countries in West Africa have a heated competition on who makes the best and original jollof rice, with Nigeria and Ghana among the fiercest contenders. I will be very diplomatic, and I admit that I haven't tried enough different types of jollof rice to select a winner. But to connect with the history, it is true that the name Jollof comes from Wolof, which are the most numerous ethnic group in Senegal, representing almost 40% of the population. Wolof is the most spoken language in the country, along with French. The Wolof Empire was also the name of a federation of different Wolof states that ruled over much of modern-day Senegal, and also Gambia and parts of Mauritania, between the 14th and 16th centuries. Before the Jollof Empire, which fragmented into competing states in the mid-16th century, other West African empires shaped the history of this area, including the mighty Mali Empire and the Ghana Empire. But this region has been inhabited since thousands of years, as it is evidenced by the presence of the Senegambia stone circles, megalithic structures that are scattered across Senegal and Gambia. The Islamization of Senegal came in different waves in time, and Islam is today practiced by 95% of the population. There's harmony between Muslims and the other religious minorities in the country, and we'll get back to analyze how Islam in Senegal has contributed to its overall peace and stability. The most traumatic event in the history of Senegambia, as with so many other places in the world, is the arrival of the Europeans and the tragedy of colonialism that they brought with them. The first ones to arrive were the Portuguese, who reached Cape Verde and the Atlantic coast. They were followed by the Dutch and the French, who became the dominant colonial power in this area. When in Senegal, there are a few places in particular that bring with them a testimony of the colonial past. The little island of Gorée, located just in front of Dakar, and reachable with a 20 minutes ferry ride. Without knowing the history, one could be amazed at the beautiful views offered by Gorée, with the colonial architecture that reminds of the south of France. But under this surface, Gorée meant tragedy and despair for many Africans. In fact, it served as an outpost for the Atlantic slave trade. The Portuguese, Dutch, British and French all fought to control the island due to its strategic location. It is now debated if it was really among the major slave hubs of West Africa or if it was one of the many scattered along the coast. But is it indeed true that for thousands and thousands of people, this place represented the last sight of land before being sailed in crowded ships directed to the American continent, where the horror and cruelty of slavery would continue? It is difficult to grasp the feelings when walking among the quiet streets of Gorée, But one thing is certain: the impact of colonialism as slavery is not an echo of a distant past, but it has shaped the world, the power and exploitative structures in which we live nowadays. By going deeper in this story, you see the influence it had also on the Casamance conflict. The second place is the city of Saint-Louis, which used to be the old capital of French Senegal and French West Africa until 1902. It is located on the mouth of the river Senegal, facing the border with Mauritania, which is just up north. It is basically at the geographic opposite, within Senegal, of Casamance, which can already give an idea of the distance and isolation that region has experienced. Despite being a tourist destination, due to its colonial architecture which has been included in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, St. Louis has experienced an important economic decline, especially when compared with the capital Dakar. Its own existence is heavily threatened by rising sea levels consequent of climate change. The borders of modern-day Senegal were shaped by military conquest of the French, who really started to expand inland in the mid-19th century, but also of deals, advantageous for the colonizers, with local populations and between the different colonial powers, namely Portugal and the British. Differently from other colonies, in Senegal there were 4 communes: Dakar, Gorée, St. Louis and Rufisque, where a local elite was granted French citizenship and the possibility to vote in the French elections. All this, of course along the centuries of colonial imposition, influenced the future Senegal in forming a political system similar to France. It is actually quite common to see how the political system of many former colonized countries has been influenced by the respective colonial powers. In a way, it has also served the Europeans to facilitate maintaining control over the newly independent states. The fact that members of the local elite enjoyed more rights compared to other colonies shouldn't make us think that the colonial domination was less violent. A striking example is the infamous Thiaroye massacre, which happened in 1944 near Dakar. The tirailleurs were soldiers recruited by the French in the West African colonies and sent to fight in a number of conflicts, including the First and Second World War. When hundreds of veterans tirailleurs were liberated from prison camps and repatriated in Senegal, a growing discontent started to rise among them due to the discrimination they faced and the unpaid demobilization benefits. When the soldiers started to organize and protest in the Thiaroye military camp, they were brutally repressed by the French army, which deliberately shot on the unarmed tirailleurs. The death toll is believed to be as high as 300. If in many cases the artificial creation of borders, along with the imposition of colonial governments that were not taking into account local specificities and differences, were influential factors in further destabilization, we can say that Senegal has been a happy exception in this sense. After joining French Sudan, now Mali, in the Mali Federation in 1959, Senegal became an independent republic with its current borders in 1960. Its first president was Léopold Sédar Senghor. The fact that the journey to independence was much less violent for Senegal allowed the country to have a smoother transition and continuity, also considering that Senghor had served in the French National Assembly. It is important to note that on the other hand, this has facilitated the post-colonial influence of France. But several factors have been at play in making Senegal the most stable democracy in the region. It has never experienced a military coup d'état, and all the successors of Senghor have transitioned to power through democratic elections or voluntary resignation. This was the case for Abdou Diouf, who came after Senghor. He was followed by Abdoulaye Wade and Macky Sall, both democratically elected. In 2021, 2023 and 2024, Senegal democracy was considered at risk when mass protests erupted after the opposition leader, Ousmane, was initially disqualified from participating in the 2024 presidential elections after being accused of rape and of corrupting young people. We'll get back to the figure of Ousmane Sonko, since he was the mayor of the capital of Casamance, Ziguinchor, but later on. Despite these setbacks, the elections were held in March 2024, and the opposition party won, led by Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who was elected as the new and youngest president of Senegal. Sonko is currently serving as prime minister in the government. Despite these setbacks, Senegal's democracy was again preserved, and this was also thanks to the strong and participative role of civil society. But there's another major factor that has been fundamental in keeping Senegal stable and with religious and ethnic harmony: Islam. The overwhelming majority of Senegalese Muslims are members of Sufi brotherhoods, more than in any other places in the world. Sufism puts great emphasis on peace, tolerance, spirituality, and mysticism. The founders of the Senegalese Sufi brotherhoods are revered as saints, wali, and their portraits are found everywhere in Senegal, in shops, on buses, in the cars, on the streets. This was really interesting to see, and it reminded me of the consideration that saints have among Catholics, especially in some areas of Italy, the Balkans, and Spain. But I have to say that in Senegal this was really on another level. It is also true that the marabouts, leaders of the Sufi brotherhoods and descendants of their founders, hold a considerable influence over Senegalese politics and society. The stability of Senegal has allowed the country to become the West Africa hub for many international institutions like UN agencies, who have their regional offices here. Being in Dakar, you immediately notice the considerable amount of investment that the city receives, much more than the rest of the country. In fact, Senegal has had an important diplomatic role in various conflicts in West Africa and has been involved in peacekeeping missions with the ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. Located on the westernmost point of the African continent, facing the Atlantic, Dakar is a vibrant and beautiful city, and it has been the starting point of our journey to know more about the Casamance conflict. It is there where we met with different experts who worked in the peace process. To see all of that, stay tuned for the next video.
Now that I'm scared.